somebody squirted him with a can of lighter fluid and ignited him. And he had one book in his cell. And when I saw it on the top bunk, I said, Charlie, it's an interesting reading selection. He knew what I was talking about. He said, yep, only book I own. It was How to Win Friends and Influence People by Dale Carnegie. I couldn't have built the Manson family without it.
Jeff Stearns, connected through cars. If they're bigwigs, we'll have them on the show. And yes, we'll talk about cars and everything else. Here he is now, Jeff Stearns.
And we were within sight, I didn't know it, of Charlie. I knew he was there somewhere, but he didn't have access to the general population. He sued and got access to the general population. The first day he was out on the yard, somebody squirted him with a can of lighter fluid and ignited him. And so he decided that perhaps the adjustment center, where you're basically in solitary confinement 23 hours a day, didn't look so bad after all. But no, the suit was, I'd come in the big Cadillac, they couldn't see that, walk through the sally port, and from his cell out a little window across the open air to the next wall where the gun rail is, he could see me. And he saw people greeting me, and then a few hours later he saw people waving goodbye. And he asked Terry Wooster, the lieutenant who was sort of in charge. Well, he was in charge of the prison, but he was also, if I had a problem trying to get something done, I told Terry, and everything happened because the warden had said, make it easy. We want him to stay here. So he looking out through the window, Charlie asked Terry Wooster, who is that? He said, well, that's Ben Gay, and he does so-and-so. I want to meet him. I didn't know this conversation had taken place. Terry Wooster came up to me one night when I came in, and he says, Ben, I got an inmate that wants to meet you. And I said, well, send him to the class. You know, we can always squeeze in another chair. He said, this one can't come to the class. I had full run of the prison. I could go even into death row, but I chose not to. I thought that was sort of bad taste to go in and stare at people. There were only about 40 of them on death row then. Now that California doesn't execute people, there's 700, I think. But I chose not to go in there. The other place that it was sort of made clear to me I shouldn't go was the adjustment center. Those were the people who, for one reason or another, hadn't qualified for death row, or they won their appeal or something, but they didn't play well with others, so they kept them locked up. That's where Charlie was. He said, he's in the adjustment center. Oh, okay. He said, but he wants you to visit with him. I said, okay. Does he have a name? He said, yeah, Charlie Manson. And so I agreed and went in to the adjustment center, and therefore his cell, three different times.
At that moment, when you said, does he have a name? And they said Charlie Manson, you were very level right there. You didn't show any emotion. Were you totally fine and calm about it? Did you kind of ask, who? Like the Charlie Manson? What happened right at that moment?
No, I working at San Quentin for 5 years with some very unusual people, some great people, but some very unusual people who had done very unusual things. And I'm running around with them loose on the floor and all. And then in Lompoc, there were people in the camp who had done things as bad or worse than Charlie Manson. So they just didn't get the notoriety and the headlines and all. So no, it didn't bother me at all. And, common sense, they're not going to send me into a lion's den and not sort of pay attention. I hadn't been in his cell 5 minutes when a guard came walking by up on the fifth tier, jingling his keys. When a guard wants you to know he's there, he lets the keys jingle. When he doesn't want you to know he's there, he holds them in his hand. So I heard the jingling keys, which was a signal to Charlie and me, we got armed people out here. But Manson, I didn't know it till I met with him, reminded me of meeting Sammy Davis Jr., who I also met. They were tiny people. Manson was not a physical threat to anybody unless he snuck up on you and did something. He was a mental threat. And I've told many people, be glad you weren't in San Francisco in the late 60s when they were all out here looking for the summer of love. Be glad you weren't there and didn't bump into Charlie Manson. Because, the Manson gang was made up of upper middle class educated people. He didn't need dummies to recruit them. And I may have told you this in private conversation, he had one book in his cell. And when I saw it on the top bunk, I said, Charlie, it's an interesting reading selection. He knew what I was talking about. He said, yep, only book I own. It was How to Win Friends and Influence People by Dale Carnegie. He said, it's my Bible. I couldn't have built the Manson family without it.
Honest to God.
Well, the techniques are you can take a gun.
It's the same.
Yeah, you can take a gun and protect your family. You can take a gun and go rob a bank. It's a gun. The techniques in How to Win Friends and Influence People will work in just about any situation, no matter what the goal is.
I can totally see that, and of course read the book, and I get that. It's just amazing. And that, okay, but did he have remorse? I mean, I don't know what you got into with him.
No.
Okay.
Charlie was crazy, but not the television crazy that he just died, as you probably know, I don't know, roughly a year ago at age 80, which was a shame because he was trying to get married. And I thought just when Charlie was settling down, he bit the bullet and took off. But anyway, he was, you've seen him with Geraldo Rivera, whatever his name is. He loves talking about, I was with Charlie Manson looking death in the eye and so on. Manson, I repeat, was about the size of a mouse and of no physical consequence. But he would get up in front of the camera in the Geraldo type situations and go booga booga booga, and he had the swastika by then carved in his head and carry on. Well, Charlie was crazy, but I discovered talking with him for 9 hours that he was nuts, but it wasn't that kind of nuts. He was nuts, evil nuts. When you looked in his eyes, they were mesmerizing. You got the feeling he could look through your eyes and out through the back of your head. And he knew how to use the physical attributes that he had and tie them into what, if he'd aimed it in some direction, was quite impressive, his mental acuity. But it got misguided. When the first night I was there, guard comes down. I forget what was the same guard that I just told you about with the rattling keys, but early on, guard comes down the area outside the cell, and the keys are rattling. And Charlie and I are talking about something. He said, excuse me, Ben, jumps up, runs over to the bars, and as the guard goes by, he goes, booga, 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 and does the crazy stuff you've seen on television. And the guard didn't even look at him, just said, hi, Charlie, and kept going. Apparently, he'd seen the show before. Then Charlie came back, sat down, and he said, I'm sorry. They love that stuff. So to him, it was a show business act.
It was proactive. It was intentional. Going back to the book, How to Win Friends and Influence People. Look, it's not surprising to me that he could say that I used the knowledge from that book to do what I did, or I used the principles to do what I did. What bugs me, or what I'm stuck on a little bit, is he's keeping it, what's the word, like as a reminder or as his guide or Bible or his one thing, like, yeah, that's the book that got me where I am. Like he was good with it or okay with it or happy about it. I mean, does that make sense?
Yeah, I know sort of what your question is.
Commemorating?
It might be. You and I might read How to Win Friends and Influence People as an inspirational book that teaches something and reminds you that people want to feel important and help them do that and so on. With Charlie, the book was a manual. Do this, they'll do this. Do this. It was very the way when we discussed it. It was sort of like you decide to take apart a car engine. First, take off the whatever, not to improve mankind, just to get the whatever that thing is that sits on top of a car engine, just to get it out of the way.
Fuel injection.
Yeah, whatever. And now you do this, and now you do this, and now you do this. It wasn't for the good of mankind. It wasn't for the good of the car engine. It was 'cause this is what you do to get people to jump through certain hoops. So I repeat, you can use a gun to rob a bank or to save your family. He used it to rob a bank.
Amazing. And I mean, so you said you spent 9 hours with him. So I'm assuming more than one visit. I mean, you didn't sit there with him for 9 hours.
Yeah, it was 3 visits of 3 hours, and not wanting. I've had friends come to People Builders and then they want to have a prison experience, be taken back into the cell by one of my classmates because they had to go back for a count in the middle of the class, twice actually, in the middle of the 12-hour class. And on more than one occasion, they went back, got locked in a cell, and my people were allowed to do that. The guard getting ready to do the count would note that there was a visitor in there. So, don't count the visitor when you go by that cell. And they'd go back and the count wouldn't clear because somebody wasn't where they were supposed to be, or somebody had escaped or tried to or whatever. So you didn't want to be in a cell when the count is messed up because you stay in the cell. They don't want to hear your visitor right then. They freeze the prison. And some of my visiting guys, one a trainer with U.S. Leasing Corporation. He was a sophisticated, wonderful guy. He spent 12 hours locked up in a friend of mine's cell. Another guy with, I think, TWA, his name was Yuki Sano. Because I remember when I got home, I went home, I knew it was going to be a while. Miss Sano called and said, Ben, my husband hasn't come home. I said, no, he's locked in the West Block. Wait in Joe Mac's cell, waiting for the count to clear. He's fine. Probably not the safest he's ever been in his life. But he's not coming home till the count clears. I said all that to say this. I went into Charlie's cell 3 times. Right after the count cleared, then I went in, and then they're going to count again in 4 hours. So I left after roughly 3 hours. I had no desire, not that he was scary, I just didn't have any desire to be locked in a small space with Charlie Manson for 12 hours.
So when you were with him, was it interesting because it's interesting? Did you have a ministry feeling? Because obviously your background is all about improving the lives of others, period. I mean, that's your common thread. So, I mean, I can understand as like a fix-it project. Did you have a feeling like I'm going to turn Charles Manson around? Like, what had you in there 3 times? What was the
No,
motivation?
he was too far gone. I was just fascinated. I didn't spend a second of trying to turn Charlie around. I do remember spending a little time in my own head making sure Charlie didn't turn me around. He was a very persuasive guy. No, it was just to do something interesting. If I've spent more time with Jim Irwin, commander of Apollo 15, than I ever did with Charlie, and because of Jim's techniques, and he was a test pilot and so on, we ran through my information contribution to the conversation rather quickly. What I wanted to know from Jim was, what was it like to walk on the moon? What was it like when it took off, wondering if Apollo 13 had blown up. He was in 15. So that's got to be on your mind. So I wanted to know stuff like that. What was it like when you came around the moon and took that famous Earthrise picture? Jim, there's several of them, but Jim took the first one. I said, what was the feeling like? And I thought he was going to say, the power of the United States, or all my work has paid off, or, whatever. He said, Ben, I was struck by my total insignificance. You're on the moon looking at the Earth, and you can see unobstructed much of the rest of the solar system, if not the universe. And it probably, what he was trying to explain to me, makes you feel very, very tiny. So I just wanted to know what Jim knew and felt. With Charlie, I want to know the same thing. They were just in 2 different professions.
We don't have to spend much more time or any more time if there's nothing interesting about Charles Manson, but did you end up leaving with anything really eye-opening or distilled down to something, or just crazy evil?
Crazy Evil was probably number one, yeah. But number two was seeing how he used the systems and techniques that I've been using and teaching for years all around the world. He boiled it down and used it for evil. But it was, in some bizarre way, I probably regret saying this, it was a validation of the way things work. People say, you go into San Quentin, what is it like? I said, nothing goes on at San Quentin that doesn't go on in your neighborhood. The difference is it's compact. There's more people inside those walls per square foot than in any neighborhood on earth, with a possible exception of some tenement project in New York City. So it's condensed, and it happens faster. You might in your lifetime witness a murder or an event where a murder was the end result. Just getting out and around, it can happen, especially if you're in perhaps a big city and so on. At San Quentin, the first year I was there, 56 people were killed. So, and you can there are places in San Quentin you can stand and see, except from behind a wall, virtually the whole prison. So you got, back then, 3,200 inmates in a very tight space under a lot of mental and physical pressure. And you're within sight of 50-plus murders in a year. I lived in a very wealthy neighborhood in Marin County. We had a murder while I was there, I remember, probably more than one, but we had one. But it was many square miles to have 3,200 people in it. And we didn't have 56 murders, we had one. But the concept is the same. So it's like being life in a pressure cooker.
This has been Jeff Stearns, Connected Through Cars.